Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Reverend Alan Lutz, and I'm the Minister of Outreach here at University Christian Church, and it is our pleasure and honor to host our speakers this evening to share about some things that we just don't really hear a whole lot about. And so we have, this evening, we have Dr. Hamid Kadiwala, Dr. Namir Ikram, and Dr. Yassar Arain. And this event seeks to honor the humanity of the people of Palestine and Gaza by sharing the firsthand experiences of frontline medical workers. Through open conversation, they aim to shed light on their suffering, uplift their voices, and inspire collective advocacy for peace and a lasting ceasefire. So will you join me in welcoming them to our stage?
All right. Can you hear me from the, yeah, okay, that's good. All right, thank you guys very much for taking the time to come here today. I think it means a lot to me, and I know it means a lot to the other speakers on here, that, after a busy day of work or whatnot, that you come here and you listen to us about this. I think that in itself goes a long way, and hopefully in the future bringing some justice to this cause. So my name is Dr. Hamid Kadiwala. Briefly, I actually work here in Fort Worth. I'm a neurologist and an epileptologist, as well as an assistant professor at TCU. So whenever I do a presentation, I always like to have a little quote, and this one's from the Lorax. Unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get better. It's not. And I don't think there's anything more appropriate than that when we're talking about Gaza, because a lot of times people look at this and say, this is a mess. What are we going to do about this? Just kind of move on. But when you see people who actively work to change and do something about it, we've actually seen in the last few years a huge amount of change that has come about people just caring a little bit. So basically, I know we have other presentations as well. I'll try to be a little bit quick about it, but I just wanted to briefly just talk about why I went, what Gaza was, kind of how my journey went to get there, the destruction of Gaza, my time there, and I always like to end with hope, so some stories of happiness and hope. So why I went, in the Quran, in our holy book, it mentions that among the believers are men, meaning people who have proven true to what they pledged to God. Some of them have fulfilled their pledge with their lives, and others are waiting their turn. They have never changed their commitment in the least. So for me, it's this idea that, it's easy to say something, but to be able to, when the opportunity presents itself to put your money where your mouth is, that is the most important thing I find. And additionally, there's this great book written by this guy named Omar El-Akkad who said, one day everyone will have always been against this. His purpose or his premise being that there's never been some great struggle when in the moment everybody was kind of not willing to put themselves out there. Let's say civil rights, for example, or something. But later on, you'll never find anybody who was opposed to civil rights. So his point being that there will be a time where people will look back and say, how could this ever happen? So it's one of those things where when I was existing in that moment, I always like to think that, I would have done something when I read stories about the past, but this is the time where I could actually put my money where my mouth is and do something. All right, just kind of briefly, this history is definitely a long, there's a lot to go through. So I'm going to be very, very brief about this. This is not exhaustive or extensive by any means. I just wanted to give you a flavor about what we're looking at here. So essentially, Gaza is not a place that's new. It's been around continuously inhabited for about 3,000 years. It was ruled by the Ottoman Empire, and then after that, the British Mandate. And then in 1949, it was split between a Palestinian side, essentially, and a Israeli Jewish side. So what ended up happening is a war broke out, and Egypt took over the part that was the Gaza Strip, and Jordan took over the part that was the West Bank. And then from 1967 to 2005, Israel took over and occupied the Gaza Strip. And they actually had something called the five-finger policy or strategy. And if you can see that, I know this is, well, maybe it's huge here. Over there, it looks a little small. But there's 5 little points here, or 4 that you can see, where they actually had settlements that kind of dissected Gaza so that they could keep their grip on it, meaning settlers. And so after that, in 2005, Israel left Gaza, quote unquote, but they continue to keep a siege over the air, the water, and every entrance and exit to Gaza. And they controlled what would go in and what would go out. And then in 2007, Hamas took over rule of the Strip. And then from 2009 to 2014, they fought several devastating wars before this war broke out. So there's currently about 2 million people, obviously less now, living in Gaza. Many of them are descendants of people who fled the 1948 war. And most of the population is Muslim, and about 3,000 of the population is Christian. So I just put up these these pictures here. I wanted to show you where generally speaking, where the Palestinian population was and where they had documented the Jewish population was. And that in the second picture here, if you can see, is actually where the partition happened. So even then when we say, when you hear stories about, well, the Palestinians were given in the deal 80% of the land or 90% of the land, why didn't they take the deal? Meaning during the Oslo Accords, or even when Bill Clinton was doing it, you're talking about 90% of a land where they were already taking they were only given 30%, or they only had 30% left. So you can see here that that's not even less. And so right here, what you see here is what's left of Palestine. From the very far left to what's on the right here is just in the West Bank, a series of cantons that they're even breaking down further. And I've been to the West Bank as well, and I'll tell you that these cities are very much separated by checkpoints and settlements. And then the Gaza Strip here. I don't know if this is going to play. Let me see. This is just a brief video about what Gaza was like before. Really, I put this up here because, whenever we see a war zone, unfortunately, our immediate thought is, okay, this place is some third world country away from us, and it's already not that great and everything, so, they're getting bombed up, whatever. It's already a third world country. But the point of this is that, no, this was a very well-developed society. And in fact, a lot of these places, when I was seeing the houses that people used to live in, the universities, the mosques, they were beautiful. So this was actually a very beautiful place before the war. Okay. So in terms of my journey, so really I just wanted to briefly go over kind of the pathway we had to take to get into Gaza. Now, what happens is that in the past, and I believe Dr. Nimmer will let you know about that, but in the past, you could go from Rafah in Egypt. So as you could see, that little strip of land borders Egypt and it borders Israel. So, but after the war started, the Rafah was closed down, and the only way to get there was through Israel in a place called Kerem Shalom. So basically, you would go to Amman, you'd get in this bus, and you would, obviously as doctors, we have to cancel all things and prepare for this. And I don't know if, I believe you've had this experience as well, is that you get everything ready, you cancel patients, you set aside a lot of time. And when you get into Jordan, you don't know if you're allowed to go in until 24 hours until they give you the green light. So they purposely, or however you want to think about it, you're basically on edge until you're given the green light, but you're already there. So, happily this time I got in, but I was supposed to go back in November, and I was canceled a week before I had to go. So happily I wasn't already there, but you can imagine someone who's sitting in Jordan waiting to go, and they're told, no, you're not allowed to come in anymore, without reason. So you take the bus, you cross, it's the Allenby Bridge crossing in Jordan into Israel. And then I put some of these pictures. You can see in the background in the West Bank that there's a wall and towers. It's a separation between the settlements and the Palestinians that live in there. So even in the West Bank, they're actually heavily controlled. This little area right here with the cars is Kerem Shalom. These are heavily armored cars that we go into, and we put on these nice little heavily armored jackets. And then you see this line of cars who are basically getting permission from the Israeli army to be allowed, they kind of make sure that there's nothing going on in that corridor, and then you drive in. And I'll tell you, my first impression when I went in there was that it felt like a scene from Mad Max. I don't know if you know the movie, where it's just a desert and all these, it's just, that's what it felt like. Because even though Biden had said that Rafah was a red line, Rafah was gone. There was nothing there. It was just dirt and sand. And we're driving through there, and there's just bands of people, if you can imagine. There were just deep bags in their eyes. They're just watching you as you go by because they're waiting for the food trucks. And unfortunately, when we drove in, the food trucks were actually sitting in Kerem Shalom rotting. They weren't letting them in. This next one is the UN facility that we would drive into, and it's a little jarring because you drive in these heavily armored trucks, but when you get there, you're picked up by your different group that you're there with. And that group for me, they picked me up in a taxi without windows, you can imagine. I went from, hey, you have to be heavily secured to, hey, just join us. And then this is the hospital, which I'll show pictures of. We would always meet for a meal at night, and this was where we would stay in these bunk beds that they split the ICU and they gave the doctors that were coming in those beds. So the destruction of Gaza, I had made this PowerPoint when, early, not too early in the war, kind of midway through the war, but all those buildings you see there are gone now. So this is, you could see that this is kind of the start of things where they start to bomb the buildings. This is one of their double tap things where they send a small bomb to warn the people, and then they destroy the building. There's no sound on, I guess, this time, and that's okay. But basically, it's just, you'll see this is at night, and just everything is erupting around people. And in a way, this is, if you will, the better time of the war when I guess they were still targeting civilians, but even then. So this is just a video that I found that, I'm not going to play the whole thing just for the sake of time, but it's showing you what Gaza was like before. Again, this idea that it was a beautiful place, and then how is it like afterwards where they're just bombing things and destroying things. This is Gaza City, and I know Dr. Nimmer will tell you more about that, but this is no longer there anymore. All of this is gone. I just wanted to show you some effects. This is one of my, so there's a trigger warning here, okay? These are very obviously graphic images. So this is after the hospital I was at was bombed by a tank shell. So these are not terrorists, these are just patients. A tank shell flew into the ICU. Again, one of the things that was also that we were seeing, or kind of a proof, if you will, is that when I was there, all the people that would come in, I never saw a fighter or anything like that. There were mainly women and children that would be coming in, or you saw on those beds, those are just emaciated people, just normal people. This is when I drove in, this is what Khan Yunis looked like. This is the city in the south, which was relatively quiet when we were there. So the heavy fighting was in the north. In the south, by this time, things had quieted down, but this is what the scenery looked like. These are just some other pictures. In the far left corner, you'll see that people are sitting there with a dead person that was there. They actually encourage people to photograph this because they want people to see what's going on. I just took a picture of this girl kind of in the middle of all the rubble. You can see on the far right corner that just even all three of these pictures really is just rubble everywhere. When we were driving into the hospital and we're asking directions for the hospital, we're just sitting in piles of rubble, driving on piles of rubble. How do you tell anybody anything? They were just like, just that way somewhere, because there's no more roads anymore. Even the mosques were blown out. Even at the very bottom corner there is just trash piles that people are searching through. This is just more destruction I just wanted to show you guys. The bottom middle picture there is actually a UN school that people have turned into just housing, because the thing is that any of these houses can be possibly targeted by the Israeli army. And in fact, when I was there was a housing unit that we had visited in the morning, and it was bombed at night. These are pictures of the graveyard, and you can see how they were destroyed. I don't know if you noticed, with the hostages being returned and the Palestinian prisoners and hostages being exchanged, what they were talking about after the live hostages were returned, that they would return the dead hostages. And in return, that the Israelis would return dead Palestinians that they had, presumably that had died in their custody or something. But actually, what they were doing here is that in the graves, they destroyed the graveyard, and they would take bodies for future use in exchanging for hostages, dead hostages in the future. So what you heard in those exchanges, they might have been some of these bodies here. And I take pictures, you can see for yourself, they're empty catacombs. All right, so the war and the ceasefire, obviously things have changed a little bit. On the top left corner is how much the Israeli army had considered a no-go zone. On the far right bottom corner there, you can see the yellow area. Basically, that's where the ceasefire line is. So the majority of Gaza is under Israeli rule right now, 58%. I just put that picture in the middle to remind people about when they were feeding people. In reality, they were hurt. Look how they just inhumanely were hurting them into pens like that to feed them, if they would feed them. In that plane there is just, I heard a thing this morning actually. In the last 2 years, $33 billion of American money went to fund this war, which is an insane amount. And the guy who was saying is, while we pay $6 or whatever for eggs here, they're getting $33 billion to finance this war. So my time in Gaza, basically, this is Nasser Hospital. This was actually attacked not too long ago, some journalists that they killed on camera. Basically, I'm a neurologist, so my experience will be very different from my colleagues on the stage here. The thing is that when a war happens, we definitely have the surgeons come and they do the bulk and the hard lifting, but people still are living their lives. And what you found is that a lot of people, they did not have the opportunity, they didn't have their medicines, right? So now a blood pressure issue becomes a blood pressure emergency on a daily basis. So a lot of people I was seeing were bleeding strokes because they didn't have their blood pressure medicine. We were seeing a lot of what we call Guillain-Barré, which is a disease where the nerves themselves stop working and they kind of ascend up in the body, and the person can't breathe almost anymore. So while we were there, it comes from bad drinking water. It comes from a lot of diseases that normally we can prevent, but it doesn't happen here. And for the lucky ones that were able to be intubated, they could be saved potentially, but many people would have to suffocate because they didn't have enough. So I would go to, that was kind of what I would see, is just the clinic patients of people who, the normal people in their daily lives, although happily they weren't injured, they still needed that care. So as an epileptologist, we're rounding kind of around different areas. This man right here, we're taking old OB books, the ones that they track like contractions and stuff. We would take their books and we'd tear them up because the Israelis wouldn't allow paper in. So we would have to make our own little paper charts for them. And then the students, amazingly, they were acting like doctors because the doctors were just exhausted. So the students were still there to learn and actually participate as if they were doctors. And that's the ICU up there. This is the hospital. When they attacked the hospital, they burned everything. I just took pictures to show you. They wrote 7/10 on the wall, which is 10/7, the date of the October 7 attack. But as you can see, the fans are burned. All those are hard drives in the corner where they destroyed basically all the files, if you will, the memories of the community while they were there. This is kind of the back of the hospital area. Right here, if you can see in the middle there that it looks like a big sand dune, basically imagine that was covered completely with trees. And the Israeli army attacked from that side to the hospital, so they destroyed all the trees. They used to have dates where they would feed the patients with those dates. So now it's just a giant sand dune, and actually that's a burn right there if you can see it. They made a pile. That's where they buried all the bodies of the people in the hospital that they took out and killed, or that they were killed when they attacked this hospital. Some 400-something bodies were there. They were able to exhume some of them, but the ones they left, they made a burn like that so people knew where they were buried. And while I was walking there in that top left corner, you can see a human bone just sitting out there. It was just laying out there. In that middle building I'm just pointing out on the bottom middle port, that's actually a brand new dialysis center that was built that they blew up. This is just Mawasi. This is the campsite they asked everybody to go to, and they said it was quote unquote safe zone, although they even bombed this area. But basically, if you can imagine, these are people who they used to live in 3-4 story houses because they live in generational houses, and now they live in these tents where one director was telling me his sister had come to the hospital, and she was sitting there on the couch, and she said, "This is the first time I could lean back on something, because in a tent is just flappy walls, and I can't lean back. I can't even lean on something." That is how much they've lost and how much they suffer right now. This is I just wanted to show you kind of a video. This is the camp. So about 1 million plus people live here now, meaning almost more than half the Gaza population now. This is just showing you kind of, we still tried to have a little bit of fun. And if you can see there, that's the Gaza beach. This is a very beautiful piece of real estate on the water. It's a very beautiful place. So I wanted to wrap things up really briefly with a couple stories of hope. Those videos I showed you of the hospital being attacked were actually done by him. This is Dr. Khalid. Basically what happened was when the hospital was attacked, he refused to leave his patients. So they ended up eventually arresting him and throwing him in prison for 6 months. His family did not know whether he survived it or not. And he told us that he would have to sit with his arms behind his back blindfolded and just sit there all day and not move at all. So this is what, for being nothing more than just a doctor. He had nothing more that he did. So this is actually a video he allowed me to have. The day he was released, he was very emaciated. He came to his father, who had no idea for 6 months whether he was alive. And this is him meeting his father. And his father just realizing that he's still alive. And there's many doctors who actually didn't make it out like that. And there's actually one in specific who still is in prison. These two boys, really briefly, basically what had happened was that their house was attacked, and one of their siblings were killed. And so their father and their older brother actually were hurt really badly, and they actually, I guess in the early part of the war, had the opportunity to go to France to be taken care of. So while they were there, they were left with their mom and their other sibling, and another attack happened on their house, and their mother and their sibling died. So now these guys are orphans. So their father in France was, really, really worried about this. So that lady there, who's a doctor, Dr. Kate, she actually said that fine. She actually went in France, got the adoption papers, legally adopted them, because you can't bring children out of Gaza. So she became their legal parent. She went to Gaza as a doctor, did her doctor thing. She treated patients. And then she fought tooth and nail to get those kids, to find those kids who had never seen her before, to get them to convince the authorities, because until the last hour, they were fighting her about taking them out, both the Israelis and the Palestinians. I've never seen such a strong woman in front of just, first of all, she's French. She doesn't even speak English properly. So, let alone Arabic. And so she was arguing with them to let this happen. And happily, because of her perseverance, she was able to get them out of Gaza, where they eventually ended up with their father, and they're still there now. This is just them celebrating. Oh, if the sound was on, you'd hear them clapping and laughing. But, you can imagine two kids who have never been outside of Gaza before. And even to this day, I follow up with them, and they're doing really well, happily. So, I'm just going to wrap this up. So, basically my conclusion here is that remember, although they say that the war is over and everything is nice and neat, the media likes to do that. In reality, it's not. It's a quote-unquote ceasefire, but there's still daily killings and daily attacks. And even if there weren't, it's not as if people are suddenly back in their houses again. I had a picture, but I guess I didn't save it on here, where a friend of mine, he used to live in a house he showed me a picture of, and now he's living in a tent. So that's what the majority of people are doing. It's raining there right now. It's not done. And we can't, just because the war is out of the media, if it is, it doesn't mean that we need to stop being concerning and caring about it. The best thing, and we'll talk about this later, is support by prayer and charity. And then, the greatest support is to spread the news so that this doesn't die in silence or people forget it and move on. I appreciate you guys listening and taking the time to.
What do you find is one of the most useful charities we might donate to?
I'll leave this maybe to my colleagues. The thing is that with me, I don't have a specific charity. Because we were there, I met people specifically, and they launched little launch good sites where we can send it to those people specifically. The concern that I have is that, some of these groups are being banned or proscribed because of just the whole political environment right now. So I don't have a specific group that I'm sending it to. It's really individual people when they ask me. But I think these two might have a better answer for you. All right, thank you. I'll move on. Do you want to use this one? Yeah, probably.
All right, thank you everyone for coming. May peace and blessings be upon all of us here today. My name is Nimar Ikram. I am an orthopedic surgeon. I actually have done medical missions throughout my life, and so I was actually approached in November of 2023, and one of my friends, he knows I don't do these things, and as an orthopedic surgeon, obviously, when there's mass casualties, when there's natural disasters, crush injuries, of course, that's the one thing that orthopedic surgeons deal with is, broken bones and things of that sort. So he approached me and he goes, hey, I'm thinking about going to Gaza in March, do you think you want to go? And I said, yeah, by March, this is going to be done and over, it'll be safe, I'll be good. Yeah, absolutely, sign me up kind of deal. And so I got all my information to the group, and then I got a call in December, and they're like, this is December 2023, and they're like, hey, the orthopedic surgeon who was supposed to go, he's of Palestinian background, and so they're not allowing him in. So we have a team, but we don't have a surgeon anymore. Can you move your trip up to January? And so I'm like, oh, wait, this isn't over like I thought it'd be. So I have a wife, I have 4 kids. And so I said, this is serious. I've been to places, but never a war-torn area that there was active war going on. I went to Haiti after the earthquake there, about 3 weeks afterwards. I've gone to Guatemala, Pakistan, and so this was the first time that there was an active war zone. So, I kind of go to the wife and the kids are late teens, early 20s, and I have 4 kids. And so I said, hey, you guys knew I was thinking about going in March. It's been moved up to January now. And of course, there's an active war going on. We go through the World Health Organization and the UN, and we're supposed to enter Rafah, and it's supposed to be safe. And so, so this is an opportunity I have. And so I said, but, again, who knows what's going to happen when I go there. And so the wife and the kids, they're like, okay, we understand. We have faith that, again, one of the reasons that we're on earth here is as a test. And so everything that we do in every day, we're tested. And so I said, this is a test from God that he has given me an opportunity. Things kind of fell in position. Like I said, I had never thought about it. My friend kind of mentioned it. And then when I got, even I think before I got moved up, he's like, oh yeah, they're not letting me go now, because they need surgeons, they don't need internal medicine doctors, so I'm not going anymore. So I said, things, God had a plan for me. This kind of fell in place for me. And so, so now it's a test for myself and for the family. I said, if I die in Gaza doing the Lord's work, I'm going to heaven, right? I said, but unfortunately, the wife and the kids, I said, you guys will be without a father then. And so again, so they, they looked at me and they said, yeah, but we realize that all of our time is limited here. From our standpoint, I could be going home tonight and pass away. So they said, again, if it's time for you to go in January 2024, would it be better for you to go in Gaza helping people out, or would it be better for you to be sitting in Plano, Texas? And so we had this whole, discussion. And so again, the whole family agreed that no, it's better for you to go, do the Lord's work, help people out. And I said, I've been blessed for a skill set that people need around the world. And so when I have a chance, so go ahead and let me go. And so that was the impetus originally about me going. So I went in January of 2024, and then again I've gone in January 2025, and I just got back. I went in October, so I just got back November 1st, so about 3 weeks ago. And so it's funny because, the first time I went, the second time I went, it was in the middle of the peace and the ceasefire. So there was about 10 days that there was active bombing, and then the ceasefire was called for, and then I was there a little bit afterwards. And so I went back again this time, and again, there was a ceasefire this time. And so all my friends were like, hey, you need to stay here. Whenever you're here, there's a ceasefire, so let's keep you here. I said, yeah, I wish I could, but that's not the case. So again, these people are kind of amazing. And so just like Hamid said, is that, when you go there, you give them everything in advance. You give them all your information. They know in advance who's going, who has a chance to go. And so, but you get there. The first time I went was through Cairo. So I went through the Rafah border. And so you get to Cairo, and then the day before, they say yes or no. And so, like he said, you don't even know initially, you've taken your 2 weeks off, your 3 weeks off, you plan all this stuff, you take all these supplies and things, and oftentimes, you're not allowed in. So there was a couple of people who weren't allowed in, and so then we're scrambling, okay, what is the most important stuff to take in, and what will be allowed in too? Because from our standpoint, as physicians, we want to take in medications, we want to take in surgical supplies. I mean, as a surgeon, I want to take orthopedic supplies so that I can do my work. And unfortunately, a lot of this stuff is not allowed to enter. And so I had taken 3 suitcases full of things. A lot of it was dressings, scalpels, simple things like that, not much big surgical supplies, because I knew that it wouldn't be allowed in. The second time I went, someone asked for a saw and a drill because the hospital that I was going to, I mean, their drill bits were so dull. And again, as I went there, literally, like, you have to kind of grind yourself, like do it yourself. They don't even have a saw, and so it was old school with something called a giggly saw, where it's basically a barbed wire. You have two handles on it, and you're using that to cut bone. And so, they're like, if you can get a saw in here somehow or drill in here somehow, please bring it. So I was able to have, one of the reps donate it, but when I went to Jordan, they're like, don't even think about it. They're not going to let it in. So as Hamid said, I get to Cairo, and then we drive in. So this is a video, and when you talk about the aid that people are trying to get in, this is a video of me in the bus that we're going in. Again, just tons and tons of trucks on the side of the road who have all this aid, and it was not being allowed in. So that was the first thing that I saw as I'm driving towards the Rafah border to Egypt. I'm like, this is unbelievable. In this day and age, there's so much aid that the world has given, unfortunately, is not being allowed in. And I saw like pallets of eggs, and I'm thinking, how long is that going to last out there? These things are going to rot, and it's going to be, good for nothing. And so then as you enter, we entered that night, actually, so it was dark. The first thing that you hear is you hear gunfire, and you hear some bombs going off. And like I said, this was supposed to be safe. And so we kind of look at the people who picked us up, and they're like, is that what we think it is? And they're like, yeah, but it's far, don't worry about it. And the other thing that you hear is drones. So there's constantly a drone going overhead. And so the drones could either have bombs, they could have guns, or they can just be monitoring. And so it's 24/7 that these drones are going off. And it seems like at night, they just get louder and louder. So, a lot of it is also psychological warfare, that again, you don't know if this drone is going to drop a bomb, or if it's going to, shoot down, or if it's just seeing what's going on. But here you can see, like I said, this was 3 months in. Like I said, this was the South, and there were so many people in tents at that time. And so you got to realize this is January. So when you think of sometimes the Middle East, I thought maybe it'll be somewhat warm. Again, they had temperatures of 40 degrees. And so they're all in tents. I was in, like, the group that I went with had a house. And so I was actually in the house. And it was cold there, they had no heat. And I'm thinking, we have walls to at least protect us, and these people are out there who have nothing. They don't have mattresses, they don't have any blankets, they have nothing. And so the hospitals will actually open up their doors and allow people to stay in the hospital. So this is us maybe it won't play. So this was actually us kind of walking through the hospital. I don't think it's good. And as you see, this isn't patients. These are just people who are any little corner that they can get. They made themselves, someplace just so they could stay warm. Even in the stairwells, people were sleeping there. So again, when we go to the hospitals, there should be sterility. They should be, that again, want to keep certain areas sterile. Here, like I said, people, even in the operating room, some of the staff was sleeping, in the corridors and things just for some place to stay. Because, like I said, when you have 2 million people, there's nothing outside. Any place that they can stay, they use. No, I'm trying to go to the next slide now. Okay, well, here's playing, yeah. So here's, like I said, as we go through the hospital, I went with Med Global. That was the group that I went with. But again, all these people to the side, you can see they have little blankets that they use so they can just have their own little private area for themselves. So the other thing that we realized was that, again, the people there are so welcoming. So this is one of the nurses. These are a couple of the nurses who are with us. And again, like I said, the majority of the people who are down there are women and children. And so they're so welcoming. Everyone says, thank you so much for coming. Hi, what's your name? Big smiles on their faces. And so again, they're like, thank you so much for coming. And again, we feel terrible because, we know that, the U.S. is supporting what's going on and sending the bombs, and yet these people are so thankful that we're coming and trying to, give them help. And then as we're going along the side of the road, I see these kids waiting, or these people waiting in line for something. What is that, a line for? And they said that's either a line for water or a line for food. Because, again, no one has any water. There's no running water there. Everyone's in tents. Like I said, if you think about it, they actually had, I didn't take a picture of it, but at that time, there was 150 people. They had one outhouse for them that they'd have to share. And so again, these people are waiting in line patiently. If they get water, they get water. If they get food, they get food. If they don't, they would come back the next day. But I was surprised how patiently they're waiting. And I'm like, if it was me and I was starving and I had no water, I would probably be fighting for this. But these people, they wait patiently for their turn, and they said, this is the decree of God. This is what was meant for us, and we'll wait with patience and see what we can get. And so, the other thing here is, when we talk about a lot of people say, hey, well, how come they don't just go into Egypt? How come they just don't go someplace else? So when we talk about an open air prison, it really is. There's no way that they can go. Here you can see that there is a large fence with barbed wire on top of that. Behind that, there is a large concrete wall, and then behind that, there's another concrete wall behind that. So when you talk about people being an open-air prison, it really is they have no place to go. So when you talk about these 2 million people coming from the north to the south, this is the most extreme south. Other than that, it's Egypt. So they can't go any further south than this. The other thing is when we're there as U.S. physicians, Israel wants to know where we are so they don't accidentally bomb us. So there's a red light, green light system. So whenever you want to go from one hospital to the other, whenever you want to go from one place to the other, you have to inform them that we'll be driving, and then they're like, okay, you have the red light or the green light. So one day we had the green light to go, and so we were moving from one hospital to the other, and about a block away, a bomb goes off. That's the plume that's left from that. And so we go to the ER, and of course, there's multiple, casualties that come in from that. But I'm like, I thought we had the green light. I didn't think anything would be that close to us. And so that is the reality, on the ground. And this is, like I said, this is the safe zone. At that time, Rafah had not been entered. It was supposed to be safe. There wasn't supposed to be any bombing that's going on. And like I said, just like, Hamid had, again, just showing that the destruction that these things, these were full buildings that were bombed. These are a car that was bombed. The next picture is very graphic. So again, if you, this is what we saw as an orthopedic surgeon. This is what I saw. And so again, please do look away if you don't want to see anything graphic. And like I said, I'll go through it quickly. So these are the things that we would see. So this is a patient who came in with his leg amputated. You see the tourniquet up top there, and then of course we have to complete the amputation. The opposite leg, which the bone was intact, but you can see all the muscle is gone there. This gentleman had his eye socket totally gone. You can see he has bullet shots to the head. And then this is a 7-year-old boy. He had one single bullet shot to the head. So as an orthopedic surgeon, we're used to things here in the United States. You have sterility, you have cleanliness, you have state-of-the-art C-arm, you have tables that go up and down. I mean, here is the OR that we're working at, and this was considered one of the better hospitals, that had a working operating room. So this was the operating table that we used. This is the one light here. They did have a C-arm, which is X-ray, in the corner there, but realistically, this is what we had. You're using iodine for everyone. And again, even when you talk about once you do the iodine, you only had scrub gowns to put on them to try to keep some sterility in that area and things. And like I said, we were using normal drills that you get from Home Depot, and we just go ahead and we just clean them with either alcohol or the iodine to get sterility. So this is a lot of things that we're doing is putting on what's called an external fixator here. You put 2 pins in the bone on one side and the other just to hold things out to length, because whenever you have these trauma patients coming in, obviously there's a lot of dirt and dust and dirtiness that goes in there and the bacteria, and so you want to come in, wash it out, stabilize it, and then bring it back and wash it out. The one issue is that when you don't have antibiotics and you don't have good health and you don't have clean water, things are going to get infected. So what we would do is, you try to do this, try to bring it back every 2 days to wash it out. Hope, again, one day we'd be like, oh, hey, this looks good. We'll bring it back in two days and go ahead and do the definitive treatment. And so this person can get up and walk again. 2 days later, they come back and they'd be infected again because, they're out and about, where there's bacteria and there's no clean water. The other thing too is, like I said, so many people had multiple injuries. So this person had 3 extremities out of the 4 that needed the external fixators. The other thing too is that, so this was like the first times. The second time when I went up north, like I said, there was a lot more active casualties at that time. The first day I was there, we had 2 orthopedic rooms. Most facilities, because we do orthopedics is the main thing that these mass casualties will have that get to the OR. We usually have 2 rooms that run. So just in the operating room that I was in, we ended up doing 7 amputations that day. And so, and the thing is, when I went up there too, I'm like, okay, we're going to be working 24/7, nonstop. And so what I didn't realize, I didn't think about, is that it's easy for me to go there for 2 weeks and say, hey, I'm here to work 24/7. The staff and the people who have been there, and like I said, I went again in January 2025, so it had been over a year that they had been working. And so they're like, we work from 8 to 5, and I'm thinking, what do you mean? You have to work more than that. And the orthopedic surgeon that was there, he worked 6 days a week. He said, I cannot work more than that. He said, of course, if there's any mass casualty that comes in, like I said, that the first, the case where the leg was amputated and you have to do that emergently, would get up and would take care of that. But the staff too, they're there, they've been working, for a year nonstop without any pay, there's no food. And so they're like, we only have, we can't work 24/7. And I took it to heart. I'm like, wow, I didn't realize that, I think I'm going to come here and do this, but these people are here working nonstop, for this. And again, how much longer can they go? And again, same thing. I went there this time. We actually would start late, and I'm just like, because it was a different hospital. I'm like, what's going on here? And like, you don't understand. These people, there's a bus. They have to get on a bus. The earliest they can get on the bus is 7:30. They have to get to another bus, and then that bus finally brings them here. So the earliest they can get here is 10, 11 o'clock. And people are coming from far away, different areas. people weren't allowed to stay in the hospital anymore because there was a ceasefire. So now they expected everyone to go back to whatever was remaining of their houses or in their tents. So again, as an American physician going there, these are not things that you think about. I think about, do we have the proper supplies and this and that? But the toll that is taken on the people there, is just unbelievable. And like you said, when you don't have food, not only the lack of sleep, but the lack of nutrition. And I mean, orthopedics, you're drilling, you're sawing, you're doing things of that sort. So it's not easy on these people. So the question was, is there any pain medications? So at least we had anesthesia. So when we did the surgeries, yes, they were under anesthetic, so we did that. But afterwards, there's really no pain medications. And even for us to take, I would take a bottle of Tylenol or ibuprofen from Costco or Sam's, and even that, you had to smuggle in. And again, and of course, that's not real narcotics or anything of that sort. So there's very little that they're allowing in right now. 2024 January, yeah. So for me, like I said, thank God, every time that I've gone, each 3 times in the operating room, there was anesthesia. So, but there are, some places, and that's what I said is because, I went to places that had somewhat supplies, they had anesthesia, they were the still running hospitals. When you talk about a field hospital, which is kind of like a MASH unit that people have made that they do smaller wound debriefs and stuff like that, a lot of those places don't have the anesthesia. So this was the last day that I was there. Like I said, Hamid said, it's absolutely beautiful. When you look at it, you look palm trees, just look like, hey, I could go on vacation here, this and that, but I don't think you can hear it. So this was the day that they started bombing and started shelling. That's the drone that you hear there. But I don't know. So you hear the drone overhead, and then you hear the bombs going off. So that was the last day that I was there back in January of 2024. And then, like I said, the people there are amazing. The kids are always smiling. They're so thankful and things. And then as they entered, into Gaza from Egypt, at their airport, they had this sign, I love Gaza. Again, when that was closed, they blew up that sign as well. And the people there are so thankful that you come, but they don't have anything that they can really give you. So what they do is that they get shells, they get rocks, whatever little things they can do. So one of the family members gave me this shell that says, "From Gaza, with love, despite the pain." So thank you for listening. Again, hopefully we'll be able to answer any questions afterwards.
Transfer? Yeah, I mean, we can see. I think so. She had asked since we're here. It's still a power.
Okay, great. I just want to make sure, can you go to this down, a couple of slides further down? I just want to make sure the play button populates all. Any of those?
It should, it did for me.
Okay, all right, it should flash.
If not, you can always get out and press play. But it was playing for me when I was doing it.
Sorry I was late, guys. My name's Yasser Rain. I'm actually a neonatologist here at Cook Children's. A neonatologist is a doctor who takes care of babies in the ICU. So I'm not a surgeon. I do procedures. I have my time in Gaza was brief. It was 2 weeks in April of 2024. I recently tried to go in August of 2025. And as Hamid said, I had experience. I was rejected. I was told I was a safety concern for Israel. So I guess they don't like pediatricians. But I was subsequently detained and interrogated for 6 hours as well when I tried to go. And I think I'm banned. I don't know. I have to hire an Israeli lawyer to try to get me unbanned. But we'll see how that goes. So my PowerPoint is going to be a little bit different because I think my colleagues did a great job of sort of setting up where Gaza is, what Gaza is like, what it's like to be a doctor in Gaza. But I feel like one of the greatest crimes of this catastrophe has been the dehumanization of Palestinians. I think it's hard for a generic American growing up in the American educational system to be able to have compassion and empathy for Palestinians for a multitude of reasons, which is probably a lecture on its own. But it does have to do with like the way Palestinians are portrayed, the way people of color are portrayed, the way Muslims are portrayed, even though Palestinian population is made up of both Christians and Muslims. And so the goal of my presentation is to humanize them a little bit. And also, I'm not going to be that politically correct because I think one of the other crimes, like having come back, I'm like, oh, Trump was right. Fake news is a thing. Like that, like, I'm not here to get political about who you vote for, whether you support Trump or not. Regardless, like one of the things that he did mainstream was like fake news and the distrust of media. And to some degree, he is absolutely correct. And it really hit home when I came back, having personally been to Gaza, and one of the only people outside of soldiers from the West that was allowed into Gaza. Like that's the other thing. Like no journalists are allowed in Gaza, and even now, like very few have been able to come from the West, right? We know the Palestinian journalists are there, and they've done a phenomenal job, but like, we're your journalists. And so one of the things I quickly realized and was kind of prepped for when I went to Gaza was like, this mission is about more than just practicing neonatology. This is about bearing witness. This is about carrying stories forward. This is about sharing it with you, and hopefully changing the climate a little bit in regards to what Palestine is and who Palestinians are to my fellow Americans. So that's what I'm gonna start off with. This picture was on my first night in Gaza. This little girl came up to me and, she lived in a tent, those are tents behind her, at European Gaza Hospital, which was destroyed. But there were 30,000 people living on the hospital compound. Like you can imagine going to Cook Children's and that whole yard in front and the beautiful walkway that goes up into the hospital is just like covered in tents with people just living there. That's what European Gaza Hospital was like. And she ran up to me and she started calling me Baba because I guess I looked like her dad. And when I spoke to her mom, I was like, where is her dad? And she said that, he was a nurse and he was detained and taken away because he was a nurse. And so but she's a beautiful, beautiful little girl. I'll never forget her. Okay, so I have 3 stories to tell. Let's see. One is about Wasim, who I'm still in contact with, still a really good friend. He's a nurse that was in his mid-20s. And then I'm going to talk about Mustafa, baby Mustafa as I call him. He was a 9-day-old victim of the attack on Gaza. And then I'm going to talk about an encounter I had that I felt like serendipitous with Nick Orr, who's a British military veteran who I crossed over into Gaza with. So first, Wasim. So Wasim is in his mid-20s, good-looking guy. He's an emergency room nurse, and he's the one that gave me a tour of the first hospital that I served at. And so we sort of hit it off, and he would sit down with me in the little space that we were sleeping in and just tell me stories. And I asked about what his story was. Every person in Gaza has a story, and honestly, they're all fit for Lifetime movies, but it's just so surreal that you don't think any one person could have experienced so much in such little time. But Wasim said that his first encounter with the war was when he was in an ambulance bringing back a 16 to 19-year-old girl who had been suffered some violent attack from a bomb or something like that, and he was bringing her back to European Gaza Hospital. He was in the back with her. There was the driver in the front. They got hit by an Israeli tank shell, and so he went flying out of the car. And he says that he had his phone in his breast pocket and it had a piece of shrapnel in it, and he swears by that phone saved his life because it caught the shrapnel that would have otherwise hit his heart. And that was very early on in October. Then the next month, his fiance and her family's house is bombed, and so he loses his fiance and his would-be in-laws. They were bombed in their apartment in Gaza City. in mid-November, the Israeli army attacks El-Shifa hospital where he worked. El-Shifa was the biggest hospital in Gaza. It's like equivalent to like the level 4 trauma center in Fort Worth. Like that's where you would go for higher level of care. They have the same triage system sort of that we have in that regard. And he was detained and tortured. And I asked him, I was like, how were you tortured? And he said, well, for 4 to 5 days, that's how long he was detained. For 4 to 5 days, I was kept on my knees, or I was forced on my stomach. I was only allowed in those two positions, and the entire time my hands were tied behind my back. And then they would stand me up, and then they would just give me lashes. And I was like, where? And he said, all like the circumference of his body around his waist. And I didn't feel comfortable asking him like to take a picture and like a video. I just felt like it was a little bit too invasive. Although in retrospect, like now that I'm really close with him, I wish I did. But he stood up and he lifted up his shirt, and you could just see like scars all around his body. I asked him like, what other stories do you have during this time? He's like, well, actually, it was really cool because one of the Israeli hostages, when she got hurt, I was her nurse. And he's like, I don't care if you're Israeli, if you're black, if you're white, like I just do the best job I can to take care of my patients. And I took such good care of her that she was one of the first hostages released, like early on when they had a little bit like negotiations, like a couple of months after October 7th. And she went on Israeli media, and he had like a video. He's like, hey, look, she's talking about me. And she's talking about what excellent care her nurse gave him. And he's like, that's me, that was me. He was like he was very prideful about it. So then I asked him, okay, so like what else happened? And he said, well, then after I was detained, they forced me to leave El-Shifa, and I just went south. And that's where I met him. I met him in the south. And he says, but I have to tell you this one story. And he told me the story, and I was like, wait. You need to stop, and you need to say it all over again, because I need to record it. And so I'm going to share this recording with you. Let's see. Oh, yeah, okay, it's going to work. Okay. Let's see. Where's your speakers? Right here. And is the volume on? Cool.
Tell me the story you just said.
In Shiva
Right
Hospital,
here.
mom take the baby like this, and as I go out Shiva Hospital, the baby is crying. The Israel come to the mom and they take the baby and killed him. All the people see you there.
And you saw it. You saw it with your own eyes. You saw it.
Yeah,
directly?
face to face. All the people killed the baby because he's crying. You understand of the crying, of the booming, of the war. You understand this baby. But the Israel killed the baby.
So this story never caught it never went viral. But I actually remember one post talking about this story. Sorry. In El-Shifa, they forced everybody to flee. El-Shifa is in the middle of Gaza City. It's surrounded by a bunch of buildings that a bunch of people live in. And like having been there in April of 2024, like it's like as Nimmer said, it's so noisy all the time. You can imagine a baby that just hears loud noise will easily cry. And so as these people are fleeing, the soldier takes the baby from the mom, because the baby wouldn't stop crying, places it on the ground, puts a bullet in his head. And so like, for any of us, unfortunately, we're not shocked by this. Any notion that the IDF is a humanitarian, like has humanity when it comes to war, is false. I've been to the West Bank, I've been to Jerusalem, I've been all over Palestine, and now I've been to Gaza. And having seen the results of their crimes firsthand, it is one of the most morally corrupt armies I've ever come across, to be quite honest. And no story will shock me. And I want to make that very clear. And this isn't meant to be political. This is just like a statement of fact. I consider this an equivalent for us if any of us had seen the victims of the Holocaust or had been in Nazi Germany and seen what happened to the Jewish people there, and then not sharing it to the public out of fear of persecution. And I refuse to live in that fear. This is just one story, and I'm going to continue. So I've kept in touch with Wasim. As you know, there's a famine and a blockade. It's still happening right now. Like, they're still limiting food. They're actually now, today, like, letting in a ton of luxury goods, chocolate, phones, and what they're stopping is still the proteins, the carbs that people need to sustain themselves, right? So, like, these are the games that are being played. As you can see, he has lost a ton of weight. That's him on the right. That was a couple of months ago. And he told me, you know, if you heard about the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, the GHF, they had these sites where people would go to get food, and it was like, this was how they were allowing food during the blockade. It was a subcontract of like, literally it sounds so ridiculous. A biker gang runs UGI out of North Carolina, and UGI was given the contract to go to Gaza and run these quote-unquote humanitarian sites to distribute food with the Israeli army right behind them. And what would happen, it was like, if anybody has seen, what's that show? Netflix. The Korean one? Squid Games, right? It was like Squid Games. And so you just like randomly would just shoot at Palestinians for the fun of it. Like, that's essentially what happened. And so he was like, I'm going to these sites to get food. I'm going. I was like, why would you go? Why would you risk your life? Why would you risk, you know, supporting your family? And he's like, this is the only way I can go to get food. And so he sent me a video. He's like, oh, by the way, like, you know, the way it works is like, sorry, I know I'm being too loud, but the way it works is when, like, before you can go and approach the site, they gather you in like sort of like a pen area, and then they put drones to monitor you.
Yes, look for all these people going to the place to get food for all this family.
So if you stand up too early before they say go, they'll just shoot you with those drones. Like, that's point blank, that's what happens. And then even as you're running, they'll still shoot you. So he sent me this other video, and I didn't, sorry for the graphic, but these are just like dead Palestinians that were like running to get food. And I have the videos where you can just see them just like lying on the ground, and you're just like, what the heck is going on? But this is like, these are the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. So if you ever, and then when I like read the media, you have no idea. In fact, you have like a ton of propaganda saying about like, we've distributed X million parcels of food, XYZ. It's like, and this isn't happening. So really the only way to really know about what's happening in Gaza is to like be exposed to social media from Gazans themselves, to be quite honest. Okay, next story. This is Mustafa Bufre. So the first time I went to the second hospital I was stationed at, Al-Aqsa Hospital in the center of Gaza, I went to the NICU to do rounds, and they were like, doctor, can you come please see this baby? And I was like, sure. And this baby's like stable, you know, you don't think anything is wrong. And this is what I see.
Assalamu alaikum, Mustafa. So right here, this is an entry site for a gunshot wound. On the other side is the exit site. He was shot by a quadcopter controlled by the IDF while breastfeeding with his mother.
So it almost sounds unreal, but like, Mustafa was in a tent in Nusayrat refugee camp, which is in central Gaza, breastfeeding with his mom, and a quadcopter comes down and just starts spraying bullets, right? And so a bullet goes in through one side and comes out the other. The quadcopter bullets are smaller in caliber, for anybody that knows guns. You know, it wasn't like a sniper rifle, and if you know babies, their skulls are very soft, like it hasn't hardened yet, so it's very easy for a bullet to go in and a bullet to go out the other side without being stopped by all the tissue in there, and their brains are relatively small. And the mom goes, you know, Dr. Yasser, what's going to happen to my baby? And I was like, well, your baby's going to have developmental problems. Like, he's not going to develop normally. Like, I had seen the scans, which I'll show you in a second. And I was like, but in the immediate period, like, I'm worried that he's going to have seizures. And so I leave Gaza, and then I get a text message. It's so weird. Like, you texting someone from around the world, right? Like, I get a text message from his father, and his father's like, hey, look at what Mustafa's doing. What should I do? And
صار يضم شايفه طبقة فاتحة ضم
And I'm like, you need to go straight to the hospital, right? So that's a seizure. That's pretty classic for a seizure. Rhythmic movements on one side. Actually, I should probably let you talk about this. So he was rushed to the hospital, and they started him on anti-seizure medications. And it took a while, but eventually they were able to control him. So I'm in contact with the dad. Let's see. Okay, so first, I'm in contact with the dad, and the dad's like, what can you do for my son? Like, they always look to us because we come from the West and we have access to more resources, and they ask, can you help us evacuate? Can you help us do this? Can you help us do that? We help to an extent. We definitely serve as like purveyors of like medical records and the go-between between medical organizations and whatnot. But at least for me, like, I don't run an organization. I don't have that much power, but I can definitely relay information. And so I'm like, gather all the evidence that you have of Mustafa's medical records and send it to me. So he sent me his CT, and this is it on the left. And like, all these holes are this is just empty brain tissue. This is brain tissue that should have been there that's no longer there. So it's like, it's just gone because it was damaged so much. And then the bright areas are areas, the white areas are areas of hemorrhage or bleeding. And so you can see it's all in the back, some on here. You can see the exit wound right here. So he obviously suffered a ton of brain damage. And I was like, okay, besides like medical evacuation, like, what else can I do? And in the back of my mind, I had spoken to a human rights lawyer about 2 weeks before I went. And she was like, listen, Yasser, when you go, I want you to gather evidence of war crimes if there are any. And this is what you have to do. This is what you have to document. You're not going to be able to take any bullets out. You're not going to be able to take anything back with you, but like, try to gather as much evidence, take as many pictures as you can. The dad was like, yeah, I want justice. That's the other thing I want justice for Mustafa. And so he put together a phenomenal document. He took pictures of the bullet. He still had all the bullet casings and whatnot. Put it together videos of eyewitnesses. And then he put together a video of his wife, talking about what happened. So I'll play that for you.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. أنا أم الطفل الرضيع المصاب مصطفى علي عزمي أبو فريق. ولد بتاريخ 3/4/2024 بعملية قيصرية، وتم إصابته وهو عمره 10 أيام بتاريخ 12/4/2024 ثالث أيام الفطر السعيد. يوم الجمعة بعد الساعة 1 ظهرا بينما كنت أصنع الغذاء لأطفالي، كان مصطفى جوعان. وضعته على صدري فإذا بطائرات الاحتلال الغادرة، طائر تكواد كفتر يخترق هذا الطلق الغادر رأس مصطفى وهو في حضني، واخترق الوسادة وخرج بين الخيمة. فنظرت إلى الطفل فإذا به ينزف دما، فأحسست أن دماغه تفشفشت في داخل رأسي، وضغطت على رأسي وصرخت بأعلى صوتي: الحقوني الحقوني، طفل استشهد، طفل يصيب، طفل الحقوني. فأخذوه الناس وأسعفوه بسيارات الإسعاف الدفاع المدني إلى مستشفى العودة، ومن ثم إلى مستشفى الأقصى. والآن هو يعاني من مضاعفات ونزيف في داخل الدماغ وكسر بالجمجم وتشنجات. ما ذنب طفلي هذا خرج من رحم أمي ليلقى كل هذا الألم والمعاناة؟ ما ذنب الطفل هذا يتدمر مستقبلا؟ ما ذنب طفلي أن يتدمر مستقبلا؟ أتمنى من مؤسسات العالم كلها وحقوق الإنسان أن تنظر إلى ابني وتؤمن لي مستقبلا. أتمنى منكم النظر لطفلي وتمام علاجه.
So that's Mustafa's story. All right, and then my last story is sort of pivoting. So like when I went to Gaza and we went to Rafah, which is in the Sinai Peninsula, you cross through the Egyptian border and then you get in the bus with a bunch of other humanitarian workers. They just throw you all together. And then you cross over to the Palestinian side and then you're processed on the Palestinian side. That border has been destroyed on the Palestinian side, it's been taken over by Israel. But that's the process. When I was on the charter bus waiting to cross into the Palestinian side, you just sit there for hours. It's super hot and like, you're just waiting. And so I go in and I see this big burly gentleman with, that's what it looked like. And I was like, I have to know his story. He doesn't look like a doctor. I just want to know like what he's doing here. And so I sit next to him. This guy looks famished. And I'm like, hey, I offer him like a Snickers bar. And I was like, hey, you want something to eat? Looks like you're kind of tired. It's like, yeah, sure, thanks, buddy. So I was like, so what's your name? Like, what are you doing here? And he's like, my name is Nick. I'm a 20+ year British military veteran. And what I do now is I'm an EOD specialist. And an EOD specialist is someone who goes to war zones and brings explosives with them to detonate unexploded ordinances so that they don't hurt anybody, essentially. And he was like, listen, Yasser, I know you're a doctor and you think you're going to go save lives and whatever, but I promise you the thing that you can do the most that would save lives in Gaza is if you come across any unexploded ordinances, just contact me so my team can handle it. He's like, but I have to tell you, Israel won't let us bring in any of our equipment to actually to safely remove these bombs, but the least we can do is at least, mitigate the danger from them. I was like, okay, I'm like not gonna leave the hospital, so when am I ever gonna do this? Well, it turns out I left the hospital, and I come across this bomb on the left. This is an MK, like, this picture doesn't do it justice. This bomb was probably like 50 to 75 yards away from where I took this, like zoomed in. And it's on the main road that goes from the north to south, Salahadin Road. And it's on the opposite side of traffic. And it's just laying in the road. It's an MK-84. This is like the biggest bomb that's used in Gaza. This is a 2,000-pound bomb. These are the bombs that like they call bunker busters, and they're dumb bombs, meaning that they're not guided, they're just dropped. And there it was just lying on the road. So I was like, okay, I gotta take a picture. I gotta take a screenshot of where I'm at on Apple Maps, and I hope like it like loads up. And I texted him. And I was like, sorry, I was driving when I saw it, so I took a screenshot as fast as I could. He's like, hi, Yasser, it was nice to meet you. Thanks for the chocolate. I was hanging out. Great work. That's an MK-84 1,000 kilo bomb. That information is extremely valuable to us in the EOD context. Please keep clear as well as you can. Much appreciated. We'll book it in our like book log, a job to do. And he said, for now the road. Oh, so then I'm like close to leaving Gaza, and I'm like, man, I wonder like whatever happened to that bomb. This was early on. So like 8 days later, he texted me. He's like, hey, I visited that bomb that you reported today. I moved it to the roadside, marked the area. We'll have a recovery team pick it up. When that is, I cannot say. For now, the road is open, and locals will leave it alone. Thanks for all your help. All the best. When I was sitting with Nick, I asked him, what's the worst war zone you've been in? He's like, well, I was in Gaza in November of 23. That was pretty bad, but that was the second worst. The first worst was Mosul, Iraq. And I was like, okay. I couldn't imagine like he would say anything other than Gaza, but apparently Mosul, Iraq was worse at that time. Anyways, back to this bomb. This bomb is made 30 miles from where I live, which blows my mind, right? It is made at General Dynamics right here in Dallas. And there I am encountering it, killing women and children in Gaza. And so like, when I have an audience such as you guys, and it's like my fellow citizenry, doesn't necessarily share the same color skin as me, ethnicity, or religion, I feel like I have a captured audience because like one of the main questions that we get is like, well, what can we do? And the things that you can do are very granular and small. And it means discouraging your family members from supporting the war industry. It means taking Palestine as a main issue when it comes to voting. That is the only way the tide will change. That is the only way the United States will no longer, and I don't say this easily, I am a very proud American, but we are perceived as terrorists abroad. Because what we don't see, others see all the time. And it's this type of destruction. Like imagine your kid being bombed and killed or losing their limbs, and then you find the shrapnel and it says made in the USA. It's devastating. And I know I'm fighting an uphill battle here, right? Fighting like the military-industrial complex, but it happens at the granular level, and that's how we have to change the tide, because we can absolutely be a force for a majority good, an overwhelming force of good. And I think and I know, most of my fellow citizens are wonderful people and have morals and have good ethics. But it's the way that we are warped as a society with the information that's presented to us that changes that. And we think we're being righteous, but we're actually not. And it's funny, the thing that I never would have thought I would be able to say these things out loud, but now I just sort of lost all reserve. But what gives me confidence in this is because, do you ever wonder, as Christians, I'm assuming most people here are Christians, do you ever wonder what it would have been like to live in the time of Jesus? Do you ever question yourself and ask, would I have followed Jesus? And then the other question, because we do that, I can tell you that, as Muslims, we ask the same thing to ourselves about Prophet Muhammad. Peace be upon him and Jesus, both. Jesus is a very respected and revered prophet in Islam. And then do you ever wonder, what the disciples were like? Obviously the disciples were very good people, right? The companions of Jesus, to be persecuted at that time, to be his follower, with the exception of Judas, right? But everybody else, right? They're phenomenal people and probably the best of society from a character perspective. That's who Palestinians are today. And I say that without reserve. I've been all over the world. The Palestinians, and not only all the Palestinians in Gaza in particular, you would feel like you're walking among the disciples of Jesus, whether they're Muslim or Christian. And that's the only reason that society did not self-implode, given the harsh environment that they lived in, was because that's their character and their moral fortitude. And they give me, I'm still learning from them, but they give me the confidence and just gall to be able to not that I'm doing anything brave, but for me, self-consciously, to be able to say these things. Because it's when you see truth, what's going to stop you from advocating for it? When the veil has been lifted in terms of the actual truth of what's going on and what humanity means, and you're taught all these lessons, I think it's a journey that I'm still on. And so I just want to say thank you for having me here, to be able to talk to you guys about this and just being willing to listen, because it means the world to me. All right, God, I'm gonna stop talking. Okay, I have a couple slides. Okay, so Nick was as he left, he was this is the worst situation I've ever seen. It's my fourth war to witness. It will be my last. To my knowledge, he has we're still in contact once in a while. I don't think he's been back to Gaza. For anybody that wants to know any books to read, these are my personal recommendations. If you feel you're not up to date on the history of Palestine, the 100 Years War on Palestine, written by Rashid Khalidi. He's a world-renowned professor at Columbia University. Ilan Pappé wrote The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine, which gets into Israeli-only sources of what happened in 1948, and he's an Israeli academic actually. And then the most recent publication, which was about 2 years ago, or about a year and a half ago, is The Message by Ta-Nehisi Coates. Ta-Nehisi Coates is the leading writer on African American thought in America. He wrote the Black Panthers. He was a screenwriter for the Black Panther. Wrote the Black Panther comics that the book is based off of. He goes through a journey where his most famous essay was about reparations in America for slavery. It was published in The Atlantic. This is maybe 10 years ago. And in that essay, he's well, do you see how Germany made up for the Holocaust by supporting Israel? He made that parallel, and then he got a lot of flack for it from anyone with a conscience and knowing the history of Palestine. And then he was okay, I need to investigate for myself. So in 2020, he was about to go, then COVID hit, so he's I can't travel. So then he goes in 2023, And it's about that experience and how he went and did a 180 in terms of what he thought, his thought process about, Palestine and Israel. And I think that it's something that a lot of us could relate to. Second to last slide, I just want for all of us to remember Dr. Thabat Salim and Nurse Reema Al-Khatib. These are two wonderful individuals that I worked with. Dr. Thabat spoke 3 languages, did medical school in Ukraine, spoke Ukrainian, Russian, actually 4 languages, Arabic and English, and she was killed. She was like 31 years old. She was killed while tending to the wounds of a friend who had suffered wounds from the war, and the apartment was bombed and killed, and she died like 2 weeks before the first ceasefire in January. And then Nurse Reem, right here on the picture on the right, her entire family were killed. That's her daughter, who was, I think, a little less than 2 in that picture. And she was killed just in her tent in a refugee camp. When she came to the NICU, she brought her daughter with her. She was 6 months old at the time. And this is the dedication they have to their people. Like, she's not paid. She comes for her night shift. She brings her daughter, puts her daughter in the closet in her like little seat so she can sleep there. During her break, she goes and breastfeeds her daughter, puts her baby back to sleep, and then goes and works. And this is like without a paycheck. Why? Because this is their act of solidarity and resistance to the occupation. That's all I have. And then if anybody wants to contact me for any reason or have further discussion, that's my email and that's my Instagram where I post more stories. If you go there, you can get an update on Mustafa, but he's now in Italy. He was evacuated by the Italian government with his like 3 or 4 siblings and his mom. His father was not allowed to evacuate. So, thank you.